The very first flight review on this channel more than 3 years ago was Lufthansa business class on the 747. It's a terrible video, please don't watch it. Since then, I've changed a lot, so has the world, but I have never flown Lufthansa again, and there's a good reason for that. So going into this review, I didn't want to be here. The ground experience and COVID screening was farcical. The boarding process was utterly hilarious. What the hell? And the food was downright dreadful. And yet, despite all of these valid criticisms, and yes, I will go there, I actually kind of enjoyed this flight, and I think you should try it for as long as you can.
Wow, this is garbage. You actually like this?
So what's it like to fly on the upper deck of Lufthansa 747-8 in business class? Let's find out on this flight from Frankfurt to Chicago. I've got a lot to say here. Timestamps if you want to skip around. I didn't book this itinerary. Using Avianca Life Miles, I had booked a trip from Split to Zagreb to Istanbul to Chicago. The highlight of this trip was to be Turkish business class on the 787. I've already reviewed it, but I enjoyed it so much I just wanted to treat myself. But Turkish cancelled the Zagreb-Istanbul flight. Avianca being Avianca, of course, they didn't notify me at all. I just happened to check offhand. I wanted to get put on Austrian, but Avianca didn't see the same space, a frequent problem, so Lufthansa was the only route that would get me home. What this means is that I'm going to be comparing Lufthansa business class a lot to Turkish's, and it's unfavorable for Lufthansa every time. Doner kebab is more popular than Weisswurst in Berlin after all. Let's talk about the ground experience at Frankfurt. The bus from my Croatia Airlines flight dropped me off at the B gates. My flight to the US departed from the Z gates. From gate to gate, including taking a train, was exactly 1 mile. And I had an hour. With no suitcase, more on that later, I ran. I actually got to the lounge and gate area with time to spare. To enter the Lufthansa lounge, you needed to present your vaccine card as well as fill out a contact tracing form. I didn't have much time, but according to the agent, I, quote, had time for a coffee. I took her up on the offer. Lufthansa lounges are fine for intra-European flights, but don't have any of the features of international business class lounges. There's no extensive buffet, dine on demand, free massage, or anything like that. When American and United have better lounges than you know Lufthansa is bottom of the barrel. To get to the gate, we needed to present our COVID tests to re-enter the United States. Icelandair did this check at check-in. Air France did this check at the individual gate. Lufthansa thought the answer was to have multiple 747s and A350s along with several Delta flights departing all at the same time being checked simultaneously by 5 people. What do you think was gonna happen? People missed their flights. There was a business and first class line, but it wasn't any better. The gentleman behind me was a paid first class passenger and was livid. This wasn't the Lufthansa first class experience he had paid for. An airport employee tried to get us to be 2 meters apart from each other. The American crowd laughed at and heckled her. Finally getting through, I arrived at my gate at last call. I can't remember the last time that happened. I presented my passport and boarding pass, and got an error. The system had me flagged as having an Israeli passport. I've never been to Israel. Guess I better fill in the map a bit more. My guess is that Croatia Airlines check-in agent made a mistake back in Split. Fortunately, it only took a few minutes to fix. The 747 had 2 jet bridges, one for economy and one for first and business class. I followed the one for business class. It wasn't even connected to the aircraft. I had the same comment for Air France. Guys, how hard is it to properly label your jet bridges? I ran to the next jet bridge, which fortunately was still connected to the aircraft. I was so relieved to actually make it.
Oh, you made it as well. You're running, huh?
Yes.
And so, you just ran.
Yeah.
I finally got to do what I've always wanted to since being a little kid, climbing the stairs to the upper deck of a 747. The upper deck is laid out in a 2-2 configuration rather than 2-2-2 down on the main deck. This means that while ideal for couples, half the seats don't have aisle access. The advantage though is it feels like you're in a private cabin on a private jet. You forget you're on a massive 747. And with only 10 passengers that were spread out to social distance and 2 dedicated crew, the service was phenomenal. I described the service on the main deck 3 years ago as efficient, and this was anything but. The service was proactive and personal, and all of the stresses of getting on the aircraft melted away. The fact that people were stuck in the COVID screening line was not wasted upon the crew, and we waited for 10 minutes past departure time to allow them to clear. Sadly, not everyone made it, and their bags were offloaded. We pushed back a bit late, and the big bird taxied towards the runway. I've only been on an upper deck of a plane once before, and it's definitely a different feeling on takeoff. Flying time was just under 9 hours at 35,000 feet. Let's talk about the seats. They weren't competitive back in 2018, even less so in 2021. There's zero privacy. The in-flight entertainment is low-res and clunky. The lack of direct aisle access for me is a deal breaker. And you end up playing footsie with your seatmate given the lack of privacy and angling of the seats. And I know some people are into that, but if a stranger were sat next to me, no thanks. For reference, here's the seat on the Turkish 787. Yeah, no contest. The padding is decent, the seat fully reclines, and there's a reading light and in-seat power. There's USB power in the arms storage area where the tray is, as well as a really old remote. On the upper deck, you also get these great storage containers by the window. Headphones are AKG and come with individual pads and are pretty decent. But it's tied to the seat, as business class passengers are apparently all kleptomaniacs. No mattress pad was provided, apparently that's only for flights over 10 hours, another win for Turkish, but the pillow and blanket were soft and fluffy. As I mentioned earlier, the service was fantastic. When taking drink orders, they encouraged multiple beverages, and I started with a glass of champagne, which was pretty good. It was served with some cold almonds though, which were a bit lackluster. Afterwards, the purser introduced herself, offered to help with anything, and to let her know if anything was wrong directly. Again, the service on this flight was extraordinary, as good as it could be. Later in the flight, I was preemptively left some cookies while I was asleep. I was addressed by name when my meal order was taken. There were 3 choices of main, and I went for the braised beef and tagliatelle. I was just in Croatia, where the food was phenomenal. The prior night in Split, I had ordered beef pasta as well, and this is what it looked like. Lufthansa wasn't that. It was revolting.
What the hell is that? It looked like it's just had a giraffe's tongue cut out and deep fat fried.
The steak was the texture of shoe leather, being overcooked, chewy, and dry. The pasta similar to that on Copa, and no, that's not a compliment, with a very weak and watery tomato sauce. The cream spinach was by far the best aspect of the dish. For an appetizer, I ordered the prawns with seaweed salad. It was actually alright. But again, to play the Turkish card, here's what I was expecting. Yeah, this isn't that. For dessert, I had some ice cream and apple cookies. They were actually pretty good. No baklava, of course, but hey, it's a good way to end the meal. Perhaps you think the second meal was better.
Nope.
An hour 30 prior to landing, there was a choice of vegetable ravioli and a sort of poke bowl with tuna, avocado, fruit, and sushi rice. Having experienced Lufthansa's ravioli the last time, I went for the tuna and rice. I make this at home all the time, you can't mess this up, right? Oh, you can. Because this rice had been sitting in a refrigerator for hours. It was cold and dehydrated, borderline inedible. Look, fellow Star Alliance members Ty and ANA can serve rice just fine. If you can't do it properly, just don't do it. I understand the avocado being oxidized at this point, and the tuna itself was alright. The standout was the dessert of chia pudding, which was quite tasty. No amenity kit was offered, but it turns out there was one buried in the storage by your feet. It had the absolute minimum of toothbrush, socks, eye shade, and L'Occitane en Provence products. Again, exhibit Turkish. Plus the zipper was so cheap it broke when opening. There goes it as a travel container. The in-flight entertainment was quite extensive, but this screen was fairly low res and slow to respond. Turkish. What about Wi-Fi? Apparently the instructions to connect could be found in the in-flight magazine, which had been removed due to COVID. I asked a flight attendant who scribbled down the address. WW2. I thought we were all past WW2. Also, the WW2 address didn't work, but WWW did. Messaging wasn't free, but cost 7 euros. Mail and surf was up to 400 kilobytes per second, effectively capped at 500 megabytes, cost 17 euros. Mail and surf plus, quotes faster, capped at 1 gigabyte, cost 29 euros. Pass. I don't mean to sound like a broken record here. Turkish, high speed, uncapped, free for business class. No contest again. The lavatory was fine, with nothing special. The flight itself was fairly uneventful, as we flew over Germany, arced over Scotland, then Greenland, and northern Canada. I was hoping for a nice view of Chicago, but the cloud cover was so thick that it only just broke on final approach. We landed and the lumbering aircraft slowly came to a halt. Coincidentally, at the same time, a Southwest 737 was accelerating on takeoff. What a welcome sight at O'Hare. We taxied to Terminal 5 and deplaned by section, first in business class first, to facilitate social distancing. But the story isn't quite yet over. As I mentioned in my last video, my suitcase didn't make my connecting flight in Zagreb. Lufthansa, though, was incredibly proactive, routing my bag via Zurich, so it would only be a few hours late rather than a full day. That's great, but they never told me. Instead, I waited for my bag to arrive at the belt, where it never did. After the belt stop, I managed to track down an agent. "Oh, I know your bag," she said. "Oh, great, can I know my bag too?" After some paperwork, it was delivered at 11 p.m. that night, which is appreciated. But how hard would it have been to communicate on board via email, anything really, that there was a plan for my bag and it wouldn't have been there for me? Just a suggestion. So Lufthansa 747 business class in the upper deck. I know I've been long-winded and fairly negative thus far. But I said I enjoyed it and recommend that you try it, and I stand by that. Let's list the pros and cons. The upper deck of the 747 is a unique and intimate space, and if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's to enjoy flights when you can. I was so fortunate to be able to try Etihad Apartments in December 2019, and would have been kicking myself had I not booked it now that it's gone. Like it or not, the days of the 747 are numbered, and we may never see a double-deckered aircraft like it again in our lifetimes. The service was also surprisingly phenomenal and definitely a strong pro. Likely this was due to the light load factor, but credit where credit is due here. Lufthansa also has several other advantages, including plentiful award space and a wide network, so you always know you can get to Europe in a pinch. The fact that they control a whole group, including Swiss, Austrian, and Brussels, allows them to reroute people and baggage easily, as they did with my bag. Unfortunately, nearly everything else is a con. The seat is outdated and uncompetitive. A big reason I enjoyed the flight was the fact that nobody was sitting next to me. If somebody were, I'd be singing a totally different tune. I understand that Lufthansa may not update the seats on their older aircraft, but they are installing these seats on brand new 787s and A350s. That's simply terrible.
Dealing with medievalism here.
True, they have a next generation seat that's supposed to debut on the 777X. Perhaps our grandkids will be able to experience it someday. The rest of the soft product, bedding and amenities are passable, but nothing more. The Wi-Fi is capped and expensive. The in-flight entertainment screens could be improved. The food is downright dreadful, borderline inedible. And what makes it so much worse is that I know Lufthansa could do better if they cared to. Austrian and Swiss, members of the Lufthansa group, have phenomenal food, some of the best in the sky. How can they be so good when Lufthansa is so bad? When I wish that I was rerouted on Swiss with my luggage, you know it's bad. So in conclusion, fly Lufthansa upper deck business class for the one-time experience and novelty, but not regularly transatlantic. I've tried to be as exhaustive and detailed in this review as possible, because frankly, I simply have no intention of ever reviewing this product again. That concludes the Return to International Travel in 2021 series. Hopefully you've enjoyed it as much as I did filming and editing it all. Have a happy new year, and I'm already hard at work on the content for 2022. If you like this video, click that button and please subscribe for many more flight reviews to come. I'll see you next year and on the next one.